Coming up on today's show, we have the Texans making a sneaky good hire that I think is going to help this guy right here, Nick Caley, in this Texans offense in 2026. And speaking of Nick Caley, at the end of today's show, I'm going to tell you why Texans fans should be optimistic around the Texans offensive coordinator. I know there was a lot of rumors. Maybe the Texans move on from him. Maybe they look for a new OC this offseason. Not happening. They're going to roll it back with Nick Caley, and I think Texans fans should be a little bit more optimistic than they are right now. Before we get going, though, speaking of this offense, we're going to be talking about the coaching staff, a lot of movement around this Texans coaching staff. Where would you rank the Texans offense in 2025? I think this is an important question, and I want you to give me a reason why you rank it how you do. Scale it 1 to 32. 1, you think the Texans have the best offense out of every single team in the NFL in 2025. 32, you think they were the worst. I'm interested to see what y'all have to say. On today's show, we're looking at some coaching staff changes that the Texans made this offseason that I think are really going to help this Texans offense out in 2026, maybe even help out CJ Stroud and get him back on the right track. First up, coming in from my guy Aaron Wilson, who broke the news, #Texans, offensive assistant Pat Riley is out per league sources, along with tight end coach Jake Moreland, assistant linebacker coach Ben Bowling, offensive assistant Mike Snyder, and assistant offensive line coach Zach Yinzer, who they didn't move on from him. He actually got the Dolphins offensive line coaching job with former Texans OC Bobby Slowick, who is now the OC for the Miami Dolphins. Joining the offensive staff, per sources, James Ferentz for the tight ends and Alex Ward as an offensive assistant. Alex Ward formerly went to Troy, where our current O-line coach, Cole Popovich, they have that connection there. But the one guy I really want to zero in right here, James Ferentz, who's going to be the new tight end coach. And I think this is a sneaky good hire by the Houston Texans. He was hired as their new tight end coach going into this season. He spent 2 seasons actually with the Houston Texans where they claimed him as a UDFA. He also played for the Broncos, and he has those Patriot ties. Of course, he played for the Patriots. He's now a member of the Houston Texans, so it's a prerequisite. You had to spend some time with the Patriots. Mostly kidding there. But last season, he was the assistant offensive line coach for the New York Giants. And I think this is a good hire on multiple fronts. 1, he has that good continuity with this Texans staff from his time in New England. He played under Nick Caley, under Cole Popovich while they were on the staff. Nick Caserio was in that front office. And on top of it, the cherry on top, if that name, Ferentz, if that reminds you of anything, his dad has been the Iowa head coach, Iowa football, since 1998. I need to do some more digging. I think he might be the longest tenured head coach in all of sports. I mean, can you think of anybody else who has the same job that they were doing in 1998? This is 2 years after I was born. He's been the Iowa head football coach. And if I know anything about Iowa football, especially over the past couple of decades, is they have been tight end you. Look at these guys who have come through the Iowa program. George Kittle was a 5th rounder, but might be one of the best guys on this list. Maybe not better than Dallas Clark. You have Sam LaPorta taken in round 1. TJ Hockenson taken in round 1. Noah Fant was taken in round 1. Dallas Clark was taken in round 1. And that's just scratching the surface. Also, Eric All, former Texans great C.J. Fedorowicz was an Iowa tight end. You get the point. Iowa has had some amazing tight ends come through their program. And obviously, James Ferentz, the son of the Iowa head football coach, he probably learned a couple things from his dad, right? Like, I think if you look at his resume, his dad, Kirk Ferentz, like I said, has been the Iowa football coach since 1998. But James Ferentz, he's probably had a little bit of that rub off on him, right? He grew up around the game. Also, in his playing career, not too shabby. He played 14 games with the Denver Broncos on their way to a Super Bowl win. Also, when you look at him, and I know everybody's going to say, well, Jeremy, he played offensive line. Why do we have an offensive lineman coaching tight ends? Well, like I said, his dad has been the Iowa head football coach since 1998, and they've had some pretty dang good tight ends come through that system. Pretty sure he knows a few things about tight ends. And the one thing I think he's going to bring to this room more than anything is the Texans tight ends have been awful blockers over the past 2 years. And if you want the biggest example of this, I think the worst example of the Texans tight ends in terms of blocking, go back and watch that Chiefs-Texans playoff game in 2025. Not this past season, but the year prior when the Texans played the Chiefs in the playoffs. That's maybe the biggest example of the Texans tight ends being awful blockers. Obviously, Dalton Schultz had a great year in terms of receiving, but when you think of the Texans tight end room, even, Cade Stover, Harrison Bryant this past year, they're not known for their blocking ability. And I think that has been a big, sticking point to this offense of why we can't, run the football a little bit better. Maybe in play action pass protection a little bit better. Look at the first pick that, Stroud threw up against the Patriots. That was due to a tight end not being able to block. And I think James Ferentz, what he's going to bring to the table as the new Texans tight end coach is the ability to kind of synchronize the tight ends with the offensive line and have them, have that, synergy together to where they can maybe block together, have the tight ends be a bigger part of the blocking scheme in this Texans run game, which was not very good in 2025. So I think this is a sneaky good hire for the Houston Texans. And I think James Ferentz is going to be one of those guys who we look at and being like, damn, he was a great hire for this Texans offensive staff. And I think he's really going to help out Nick Caley in 2026. And speaking of Nick Caley, coming up in just a moment, I'm going to tell you why I'm optimistic about the Texans offensive coordinator going into this next season. I know a lot of people are kind of down on this Texans offense, CJ Stroud, Nick Caley. I'm going to tell you why you should have a little bit more hope. Before I do so, quick word from our sponsor, PrizePicks, because the big game, it's almost here, folks. What does that mean? That means it's your last chance to get in on the football action before next season. So close the season out right with PrizePicks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. It's super simple. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. If you get your picks right, you can cash in. And it's not just football. After the big game, there's also basketball, hockey, baseball's right around the corner. But you want to get on the last football action of the year? Do it with our friends over at PrizePicks. This is the lineup that I've been rolling with for the big game. And if you notice, the most important part of my lineup is this top one right here. They're giving a Drake May max discount, 0.5 passing yards. He's going to get 1 passing yard in the big game. They're basically giving you a freebie with Drake May. I paired that with a Ramondre Stevenson touchdown, Sam Darnold, 1.5 passing touchdowns. I like the more on that. And then maybe the most fun one on mine, I'm going Kenneth Walker, 3.5 yards on his first rush. Give me the more on that. You can use my lineup or make your own. Just do it with our friends over at PrizePicks. Available now in all 50 states. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, let's talk about why I'm optimistic about Nick Caley going into 2026. I think he got a little bit better throughout the year. Obviously, there were some bumps and bruises along the road, and it wasn't always pretty with Nick Caley's offense in 2025. But as my good friend Texans Jacob pointed out in this tweet, another great follow on Twitter if you're a Texans fan, I think he kind of outlined that, obviously I made the joke early in the season like, oh, I'm so sorry, Bobby Slowick, wish we had you back. But when you look at Nick Caley's offense compared to Bobby Slowick's offense in a lot of these advanced metrics, it was actually better, right? First in EPA per play, which is expected points added. Or second in EPA with the pass. Second in EPA with the rush. Second in yards per play. First in pressure rate allowed, which was, a good thing, right? First in rushing success rate. I mean, look at these advanced metrics. And then he even mentions at the end that he didn't have an RB1 the entire season, right? Joe Mixon was out for the entire year, and the tight end depth was questionable. Dalton Schultz had a good year, but if you go back into, OTA's preseason before the start of the 2025 season, the guy that we were all lamenting was going to be the X factor, Brevin Jordan, got injured before the season even started. So we really didn't get to see that tight end depth, which Nick Caley, a former tight end guy, was kind of probably leaning on, we're going to have Brevin Jordan have these tight ends and be a real threat at that position. And then that was kind of nixed right before the season even started. Listen, it was an up and down year for Caley. But as a first-time play caller, that kind of came with, him being the new OC, right? This was his first time being a play caller in the NFL, and I do think he showed promise and showed the ability to get better week in and week out, and I think the offense was evolving throughout the season. Obviously, had some other, problems with guys being out, especially Nico Collins being out in that Patriots game. I think that kind of threw it for a whirl. Also, it being a snow game, Trent Brown being out last second at right tackle didn't help anything at all either. But I think Nick Caley showed enough to be like, hey, I think he's got some promise going into next year. And as a first-time play caller, I'm excited to see what he learned from his first year as an NFL OC and how he's going to build on that. Because speaking about Trent Brown being out in that Patriots game, I think the offensive line is going to be a big sticking point because I think it's going to be better next season, right? It improved a little bit from 2024 to 2025. Now from 2025 to 2026, I expect it to take another jump in the right direction because obviously you have Ariante Ursery, who is going to be the anchor at the left tackle spot, maybe one of the most important spots. You still don't know where Titus Howard's going to be. Ed Ingram, possibly going to get re-signed by this Texans squad. I don't know if Titus Howard's going to be left guard or right tackle, but regardless of where they put Titus Howard, what's going to be going on, I think the trenches is going to be the number one priority for Nick Caserio in this Texans front office this offseason. They need to get more physical up front, and I think adding a guy like James Ferentz as the tight end coach is going to help you be a little bit more physical, having that offensive line mentality at the tight end coach and saying, hey, we want to be able to put a hat on a hat, move guys off the line of scrimmage, and be able to block. And I think this Texans offensive line is going to do a better job at that in 2026. Hopefully, they really address that during the draft, during free agency, and bring more talent in to this Texans offensive line. And my third point, why I'm optimistic, and you're going to say, oh, Jeremy, this is such a cliche. This is such a stupid point. But it's a cliche for a reason. Pressure makes diamonds. And I don't think there's a single member of this Houston Texans team, rather than Nick Caley and CJ Stroud, who has more pressure on them going into the 2026 season. I think those two guys have the most pressure by far out of anybody on this Texans team, anybody on this Texans staff. It's those two guys. It's CJ Stroud and it's Nick Caley. And this year is truly a make or break year for Caley. And I expect him to be able to be in the lab all offseason long, be able to, script up new plays, script up new ideas, script up, see what went wrong in 2025 and correct those issues going into 2026. Because we remember, whenever he was hired, a lot of us were really excited because he was a Sean McVay disciple. And Sean McVay had some glowing remarks about Nick Caley last offseason that I think are still going to hold true going into this next year. This is what McVay had to say about Caley last offseason. He comes from a great pedigree. You talk about a consistent approach to the core beliefs and the things that are in alignment with winning football games. His ability to communicate, his background and knowledge that he brought from his experience in New England, but then also his willingness to be able to learn and have a good feel for the landscape of the league. I think, his ability to learn from his past mistakes and kind of lean on, other guys and kind of bounce off ideas, that's going to help Caley going into this next season. And really, he's coaching for his job this year. Obviously, we saw Bobby Slowick was 2 years and out. Nick Caley doesn't want the same thing to happen to him. So he knows he is coaching for his job. He is coaching for his basically NFL coaching career, because if Caley is able to turn things around this year, I think he becomes a hot candidate for coaching jobs next offseason or the year after that. If he's able to fix CJ Stroud, make CJ Stroud look like he did his rookie year, you're telling me that NFL teams with head coaching openings aren't going to be looking at this guy to fill those openings? I think so. I think he'll be a hot name if he's able to fix this Texans offense and get this offense moving in the right direction. And that'll catapult his career. On the flip side, if he doesn't do those things, does he get another opportunity to be an OC in the NFL? I don't think he would for at least a little bit. Bobby Slowick took him a year out. He had to be an assistant with the Dolphins, eventually got back to an OC spot. But for Caley, you never know. Will he get another opportunity if he flames out in Houston? That is yet to be seen. I want to see what Caley can do this year, and I'm optimistic that he's going to be in the lab all offseason long. And if this isn't telling that him and CJ Stroud are both under a lot of pressure this offseason, look at this tweet from Aaron Wilson. And I think this is very telling about not only Stroud, but Caley going into next year. Aaron Wilson said this yesterday. Hashtag Texans quarterback C.J. Stroud was invited to the Pro Bowl per a league source and declined the invitation as he prepared for next season. They know this next year is a make or break year for this Texans offense. And Texans fans, we expect this offense to be much better in 2026, or else major changes have to be made. So, as I said prior in this video, pressure makes diamonds. And hopefully the pressure that Nick Caley and CJ Stroud are under this offseason produces some of those diamonds. That's all I have for you on today's show, folks. If you want to hit me up on Twitter, you can do so at Jeremy Chuggs. My DMs are always open. And if you made it to the end of today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button for free Texans content all year long. You know we got you covered here on Texans Today with the best Texans content on YouTube. Just go ahead, go down and hit that sub button. We're trying to get to 50,000 subscribers before the start of the NFL draft. So go ahead, go down and hit that sub button for free Texans content all year long.